Hello everyone, thank you for joining me again and welcome to any new viewers. This is To The Point English with Ben. I'm Ben, and in this lesson I'm going to teach you some very useful and interesting advanced English verbs. Now, although these are very advanced verbs, you'll be very familiar with the words themselves because they're also pretty basic nouns. So as nouns, they'll probably be considered sort of A1 or A2 level vocabulary, but as verbs, they're considered C1 or C2 level vocabulary. Now, anyone who's been studying English or had any kind of relationship with English will know that this is quite common in English, isn't it? We tend to take nouns and make verbs of them. For example, to phone, right? You can say, I'll call you on the phone, or you can just say, I'll phone you. Or even, perhaps a little bit more traditionally, we would say, I'll telephone you. And even nouns like email. An email is a thing, right? You send an email. So we use the verb to send an email, but more commonly, we'll just say to email someone. So I'll email you the information in the morning. And even Google. I mean, Google is a company, but we use the word Google as a verb to describe the action of searching, usually on Google, but it could be another search engine, to search for information on the internet, to Google something. And the reason we can do this in English is because of the basic and simple conjugation of verbs. So, as I said, you can say I Google, she Googles, they Google, we Google, everybody Googles. Yesterday I Googled, she Googled, he Googled, I will Google. In other languages, I know Spanish, for example, it's much more complicated because the conjugation of verbs is not so simple. But let's look at the 10 advanced verbs that we're going to look at today, which you'll be very familiar with as nouns, but perhaps not so familiar with as verbs. And the first one, number one, is to floor. To floor. And when we floor someone, we really confuse or surprise them. So it's usually when you give somebody information which is so shocking, so surprising that it floors them. Now, we can use floor in a more literal sense, like when a boxer knocks out their opponent, they floor them, so they fall to the floor. But in the more common day-to-day use, it's not that literal. You're not literally falling to the floor. You're just extremely surprised or perhaps confused. So let's look at an example sentence. Mark was floored when his boss told him that the company was closing down for good. So Mark was floored. Mark was astonished, shocked, very surprised when his boss told him that the company was closing down for good. And good here, be careful with this word because it doesn't mean the opposite of bad here. It doesn't mean sort of for the better. No, it means forever. When we say something happens for good, it means forever. And the second advanced verb we have is to eye. To eye. So it's a part of the body as a noun, of course, your eye. But we can use it as a verb. So to eye someone or to eye something. And that means to look at someone or something very closely, often with a sort of desire, when you desire that person or that thing. And the example sentence, I noticed Dave eyeing my sandwich, so I gave him half. So maybe you're having lunch together with your friend called Dave, and you're enjoying your sandwich, and you can see that Dave is eyeing your sandwich. So he's looking closely at your sandwich. So he's desiring your sandwich. He really wants your sandwich. So you give him half. You're feeling generous. Okay, the next one, number three. This is actually a verb that I shared in one of my quizzes that I do regularly on my community tab in the YouTube platform. I've been sharing a lot of those recently, especially because it's summer and people need to keep some kind of contact with English rather than sort of studying very hard. But yeah, the verb is to sport. So if you've been following my community posts, you'll know this one, but I've got a different example for you today. But to sport, so sport as a verb, it has a few different meanings, but the most common and the most useful meaning, in my opinion, is to wear or to display something proudly. So often clothes, but not just clothes. It could be glasses, for example. I'm sporting these glasses. You could sport a beard. You could sport a tattoo. And that's the example I've got for you today. Jimmy turned up to the picnic sporting a new tattoo on his arm. So Jimmy turned up to the picnic. He arrived at the picnic sporting. So he was wearing, but you don't exactly wear a tattoo, but you have it on your body. So you're displaying it. And this new tattoo, so he was very proud of it. As I said, you could be sporting a new hat. It's usually something you're proud of, so something new. Like, for example, if somebody grows a new beard, so So the first time you see them with it, they're sporting it. They're very proud of it. And the next verb is to milk. To milk. So again, to milk has different meanings. The most literal meaning of to milk as a verb is taking the milk from a cow. So when farmers go to their dairy cows and to extract milk, they milk the cow. But in more day-to-day situations, it means to get as much as possible out of a situation. So to make the most of the situation. Okay, so the example sentence. I'm not saying that Derek wasn't ill, but he certainly milked it to get a few more days off work. So in this case, Derek, who is a colleague, was definitely ill, but he really made the most of the situation. He got the most out of the situation by getting a few extra days off work. It's usually in a negative sense. If you milk a situation, it's kind of a bit negative, taking too much from the situation, more than you really deserve, or more than is fair. By the way, speaking of being ill, you may have noticed I have a slightly different voice today. I've been ill for the last few days, so excuse the slightly deeper and rougher voice. And the next verb, which you'll be very familiar with as a noun, it's to foot. To foot, and that simply means to pay for something. To foot, usually in the collocation to foot the bill. I'll foot the bill for lunch as long as you drive home. So here I'm just saying I'll pay for lunch, no problem, I'll pay for lunch, I'll foot the bill, but on the condition that as long as you drive home. So as I said, we say foot the bill, it could be foot the cost of something, foot the expense, so it really means to pay for something. And the next verb is to label. Again, you'll be familiar with label. I have a small label here and a bigger label at the back. So you know what a label is. But to label someone or something, again, the more literal sense is to put a label. Literally, to put a label on something is to label it. But in a more day-to-day sense, it means to unfairly describe someone by using a particular word. And it's important, that word unfairly. So it has a negative connotation, really. And the example is, Mary's boss labelled her as problematic just because she disagreed with her once. So Mary's boss labelled her as problematic. So she gave her that sort of label. She put that label, problematic. Again, not literally, just that's how she referred to her. That's how her boss referred to her. Only just because she disagreed with her once. Just because Mary disagreed with her boss once. And the next verb is to shelve. To shelve. Now this one's a little bit strange because it comes from the noun shelf, which again I'm sure you're familiar with, but you have to change the word slightly to make it a verb in this case. It's very similar to the noun half, which as a verb it becomes halve. So to halve something, to make it two halves, you have to change the spelling. So that's the case here. Shelf becomes to shelve, to shelve. And it means to delay or to postpone plans, usually plans. It could be a project or something, but some kind of plan. So the example sentence, we had to shelve the project until we could raise more money. So we had to shelve the project until we could raise more money. So we had this plan for a project. It was going ahead, but at some point we decided we had to delay or postpone it because we didn't have enough money. So it's not just cancelling the project or forgetting about the project, it's shelving it. So you can imagine you have a project on your table which you're doing. I'm talking in a more literal sense now. Imagine you have the project on the table. Imagine literally putting it on the shelf for later. So it's there, it's to one side, it's on the shelf. You're not throwing it away, you're not putting it in the rubbish, you're putting it on the shelf for later, so you're shelving the project. Of course, it's figurative, it's not real, but it's the idea, the same idea. Okay, the next verb. This is a nice one, and according to Cambridge, it's a C2 verb, and it is to echo. To echo. So again, you're probably familiar with the noun an echo, when you have an echo, or even to echo in the more literal sense, when you shout in a big cave and your voice comes back to you with a slight delay, that's to echo. But in a more figurative sense, we use it to mean to express or to think what someone else has expressed or thought. So basically repeating what someone else has said or thought, and you're echoing them. So that's the idea, right? You know, You're repeating what they're saying. So not necessarily the same words, the exact same words, but you're echoing the idea usually. So the scientist echoed the politician's advice on wearing masks. Is it too late to be still using examples about the pandemic? Maybe, but I'm not that imaginative. So the scientist echoed the politician's advice on wearing masks. So the politician had previously given some advice on wearing masks, and the scientist gave the same advice. As I said, maybe not using the exact same words, but the same advice, the same ideas. And the next one, this is quite British English and it's quite colloquial, but I really like it and I use it a lot. It's very common in Britain to use this verb, but it's to bottle. Usually we say to bottle something or just to bottle it. And when we bottle something, it means we don't do something due to fear. And just a word about the pronunciation, you may have heard this before, but you can pronounce this word in many ways. So you can say bottle, so pronouncing the T, but most native English speakers don't pronounce the T, whether it's American English or British English or Australian English or whichever variation of English, we don't usually pronounce the T clearly. So in my English, we would usually say bottle. So that's the glottal stop. So the T is not clearly pronounced, bottle. But let's look at an example. Danny was going to quit her job today, but she bottled it at the last moment. So Danny had the intention of quitting her job. She went in, maybe she was going to talk to the boss, but she didn't do it. She didn't go through with it because of fear. She was too afraid to quit her job. She bottled it, or she bottled it. Okay, thankfully just one more verb because I can feel my voice is going. I'm losing my voice. But we're nearly there. The last one is to balloon, So again, I'm sure you're very familiar with the noun balloon. You have them at your birthday parties. But as a verb, it simply means to increase quickly. So if something balloons, it increases in size or amount very quickly. So you imagine a helium balloon going up, it gets bigger. Or maybe it's about blowing up the balloon, it gets bigger and bigger. But the idea is that this thing or the quantity is increasing quickly. So the example is, sales ballooned in the second quarter due to the marketing campaign. Okay, I'm sorry that's a really boring example to end with, but as I said, I'm not feeling very inspired today. But yeah, sales ballooned in the second quarter. So this is a very business example, but sales increased very quickly in the second quarter, in this case due to the marketing campaign. But other things can balloon. Your weight can balloon over Christmas. Usually our weight balloons because we have too much food and drink. But yeah, it's often used in a business situation. As always, come up with your own examples, share them in the comments, try to make an emotional connection. I'm going to rest my voice now because it's almost gone, and join me again for another video very soon.